Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, Part 3, concluded.
Disc 19.
It was the watchers who found it unbearable to wait through the minutes of the pauses filled with the sound of the heartbeat. The heart was now racing in an irregular rhythm. The pauses were calculated to let that beat slow down, but allow no relief to the victim, who had to wait for a shock at any moment. Galt lay relaxed, as if not attempting to fight the pain, but surrendering to it, not attempting to negate it, but to bear it. When his lips parted for breath and a sudden jolt slammed them tight again, he did not resist the shaking rigidity of his body, but he let it vanish the instant the current left him. Only the skin of his face was pulled tight, and the sealed line of his lips twisted sidewise once in a while. When a shock raced through his chest, the gold-copper strands of his hair flew with the jerking of his head, as if waving in a gust of wind beating against his face across his eyes. The watchers wondered why his hair seemed to be growing darker, until they realized that it was drenched in sweat. The terror of hearing one's own heart struggling as if about to burst at any moment had been intended to be felt by the victim. It was the torturers who were trembling with terror, as they listened to the jagged, broken rhythm and missed a breath with every missing beat. It sounded now as if the heart were leaping, beating frantically against its cage of ribs in agony and in a desperate anger. The heart was protesting. The man would not. He lay still, his eyes closed, his hands relaxed, hearing his heart as it fought for his life. Wesley Mooch was first to break. "Oh, God, Floyd!" he screamed. "Don't kill him! Don't dare kill him! If he dies, we die!" "He won't," snarled Ferris. "He'll wish he did, but he won't. The machine won't let him. It's mathematically computed. It's safe." "Oh, isn't it enough? He'll obey us now. I'm sure he'll obey." "No, it's not enough. I don't want him to obey. I want him to believe, to accept, to want to accept. We've got to have him work for us voluntarily." "Go ahead," cried Taggart. "What are you waiting for? Can't you make the current stronger? He hasn't even screamed yet." "What's the matter with you?" gasped Mooch, catching a glimpse of Taggart's face while a current was twisting Galt's body. Taggart was staring at it intently, yet his eyes seemed glazed and dead. But around that inanimate stare, the muscles of his face were pulled into an obscene caricature of enjoyment. "Had enough?" Ferris kept yelling to Galt. "Are you ready to want what we want?" They heard no answer. Galt raised his head once in a while and looked at them. There were dark rings under his eyes, but the eyes were clear and conscious. In mounting panic, the watchers lost their sense of context and language, and their three voices blended into a progression of indiscriminate shrieks. "We want you to take over. We want you to rule. We order you to give orders. We demand that you dictate. We order you to save us. We order you to think." They heard no answer but the beating of the heart, on which their own lives depended. The current was shooting through Galt's chest, and the beating was coming in irregular spurts, as if it were racing and stumbling, when suddenly his body fell still, relaxing. The beating had stopped. The silence was like a stunning blow, and before they had time to scream, their horror was topped by another, by the fact that Galt opened his eyes and raised his head. Then they realized that the drone of the motor had ceased too, and that the red light had gone out on the control panel. The current had stopped. The generator was dead. The mechanic was jabbing his finger at the button to no avail. He yanked the lever of the switch again and again. He kicked the side of the machine. The red light would not go on. The sound did not return. "Well?" snapped Ferris. "Well, what's the matter?" "The generator's on the blink," said the mechanic helplessly. "What's the matter with it?" "I don't know." "Well, find out and fix it." The man was not a trained electrician. He had been chosen not for his knowledge, but for his uncritical capacity for pushing any buttons. The effort he needed to learn his task was such that his consciousness could be relied upon to have no room for anything else. He opened the rear panel of the machine and stared in bewilderment at the intricate coils. He could find nothing visibly out of order. He put on his rubber gloves, picked up a pair of pliers, tightened a few bolts at random, and scratched his head. "I don't know," he said. His voice had a sound of helpless docility. "Who am I to know?" The three men were on their feet, crowding behind the machine to stare at its recalcitrant organs. They were acting merely by reflex. They knew that they did not know. "But you've got to fix it," yelled Ferris. "It's got to work. We've got to have electricity." "We must continue," cried Taggart. He was shaking. "It's ridiculous. I won't have it. I won't be interrupted. I won't let him off." He pointed in the direction of the mattress. "Do something," Ferris was crying to the mechanic. "Don't just stand there. Do something. Fix it." "I order you to fix it." "But I don't know what's wrong with it," said the man, blinking. "Then find out." "How am I to find out?" "I order you to fix it. Do you hear me? Make it work, or I'll fire you and throw you in jail." "But I don't know what's wrong with it." The man sighed, bewildered. "I don't know what to do." "It's the vibrator that's out of order," said a voice behind them. They whirled around. Galt was struggling for breath, but he was speaking in the brusque, competent tone of an engineer. "Take it out and pry off the aluminum cover. You'll find a pair of contacts fused together. Force them apart, take a small file and clean up the pitted surfaces, then replace the cover, plug it back into the machine, and your generator will work." There was a long moment of total silence. The mechanic was staring at Galt. He was holding Galt's glance, and even he was able to recognize the nature of the sparkle in the dark green eyes. It was a sparkle of contemptuous mockery. He made a step back. In the incoherent dimness of his consciousness, in some wordless, shapeless, unintelligible manner, even he suddenly grasped the meaning of what was occurring in that cellar. He looked at Galt. He looked at the three men. He looked at the machine. He shuddered. He dropped his pliers and ran out of the room. Galt burst out laughing. The three men were backing slowly away from the machine. They were struggling not to allow themselves to understand what the mechanic had understood. "No!" cried Taggart suddenly, glancing at Galt and leaping forward. "No, I won't let him get away with it." He fell down on his knees, groping frantically to find the aluminum cylinder of the vibrator. "I'll fix it. I'll work it myself. We've got to go on. We've got to break him." "Take it easy, Jim," said Ferris uneasily, jerking him up to his feet. Hadn't we better lay off for the night?" said Mooch pleadingly. He was looking at the door through which the mechanic had escaped, his glance part envy, part terror. "No!" cried Taggart. "Jim, hasn't he had enough? Don't forget, we have to be careful." "No, he hasn't had enough. He hasn't even screamed yet." "Jim!" cried Mooch suddenly, terrified by something in Taggart's face. "We can't afford to kill him. You know it." "I don't care. I want to break him. I want to hear him scream. I want—" And then it was Taggart who screamed. It was a long, sudden, piercing scream, as if at some sudden sight, though his eyes were staring at space and seemed blankly sightless. The sight he was confronting was within him. The protective walls of emotion, of evasion, of pretense, of semi-thinking and pseudo-words built up by him through all of his years, had crashed in the span of one moment, the moment when he knew that he wanted Galt to die, knowing fully that his own death would follow. He was suddenly seeing the motive that had directed all the actions of his life. It was not his incommunicable soul, or his love for others, or his social duty, or any of the fraudulent sounds by which he had maintained his self-esteem. It was the lust to destroy whatever was living for the sake of whatever was not. It was the urge to defy reality by the destruction of every living value, for the sake of proving to himself that he could exist in defiance of reality and would never have to be bound by any solid, immutable facts. A moment ago, he had been able to feel that he hated Galt above all men, that the hatred was proof of Galt's evil, which he need define no further, that he wanted Galt to be destroyed for the sake of his own survival. Now he knew that he had wanted Galt's destruction at the price of his own destruction to follow. He knew that he had never wanted to survive. He knew that it was Galt's greatness he had wanted to torture and destroy. He was seeing it as greatness by his own admission, greatness by the only standard that existed, whether anyone chose to admit it or not, the greatness of a man who was master of reality in a manner no other had equaled. In the moment when he, James Taggart, had found himself facing the ultimatum to accept reality or die, It was death his emotions had chosen. Death rather than surrender to that realm of which Galt was so radiant a sun. In the person of Galt, he knew. He had sought the destruction of all existence. It was not by means of words that his knowledge confronted his consciousness. As all his knowledge had consisted of emotions, so now he was held by an emotion and a vision that he had no power to dispel. He was no longer able to summon the fog to conceal the sight of all those blind alleys he had struggled never to be forced to see. Now, at the end of every alley, he was seeing his hatred of existence. He was seeing the face of Cheryl Taggart with her joyous eagerness to live, and that it was this particular eagerness he had always wanted to defeat. He was seeing his face as the face of a killer whom all men should rightfully loathe, who destroyed values for being values, who killed in order not to discover his own irredeemable evil. "No," he moaned, staring at that vision, shaking his head to escape it. "No. No." "Yes," said Galt. He saw Galt's eyes looking straight at his as if Galt were seeing the things he was seeing. "I told you that on the radio, didn't I?" said Galt. This was the stamp James Taggart had dreaded, from which there was no escape, the stamp and proof of objectivity. "No," he said feebly once more, but it was no longer the voice of a living consciousness. He stood for a moment, staring blindly at space. Then his legs gave way, folding limply, and he sat on the floor, still staring, unaware of his action or surroundings. "Jim!" called Mooch. There was no answer. Mooch and Ferris did not ask themselves or wonder what it was that had happened to Taggart. They knew that they must never attempt to discover it, under peril of sharing his fate. They knew who it was that had been broken tonight. They knew that this was the end of James Taggart, whether his physical body survived or not. Let's get Jim out of here," said Ferris shakily. "Let's get him to a doctor, or somewhere." They pulled Taggart to his feet. He did not resist. He obeyed lethargically, and he moved his feet when pushed. It was he who had reached the state to which he had wanted Galt to be reduced. Holding his arms at both sides, his two friends led him out of the room. He saved them from the necessity of admitting to themselves that they wanted to escape Galt's eyes. Galt was watching them. His glance was too austerely perceptive. "We'll be back," snapped Ferris to the chief of the guards. "Stay here and don't let anyone in. Understand? No one." They pushed Taggart into their car, parked by the trees at the entrance. "We'll be back," said Ferris, to no one in particular, to the trees and the darkness of the sky. For the moment their only certainty was that they had to escape from that cellar, the cellar where the living generator was left tied by the side of the dead one. Chapter 10. The last chapter. In the name of the best within us. Dagny walked straight toward the guard who stood at the door of Project F. Her step sounded purposeful, even, and open, ringing in the silence of the path among the trees. She raised her head to a ray of moonlight to let him recognize her face. "Let me in," she said. "No admittance," he answered in the voice of a robot. "By order of Dr. Ferris." "I am here by order of Mr. Thompson." "Uh-huh. I don't know about that." "I do." "I mean, Dr. Ferris hasn't told me." "Ma'am." "I am telling you." "But I'm not supposed to take any orders from anyone excepting Dr. Ferris." "Do you wish to disobey Mr. Thompson?" "Oh, no, ma'am, but if Dr. Ferris said to let nobody in, that means nobody." He added uncertainly and pleadingly, "Doesn't it?" "Do you know that I'm Dagny Taggart, and that you've seen my pictures in the papers with Mr. Thompson and all the top leaders of the country?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then decide whether you wish to disobey their orders." "Oh, no, ma'am, I don't." "Then let me in."
But I can't disobey Dr. Ferris either."
"Then choose."
"But I can't choose, ma'am." "Who am I to choose?"
"You'll have to."
"Look,"
he said hastily, pulling a key from his pocket and turning to the door.
"I'll ask the chief."
"No," she said.